Lot number 6 is a story that I wrote called The Ripening of Rustam Khan. And along with it comes one of the most alluring objects that I think I have ever spent time with and held in my hands. I remember picking it up for the first time and my hands tingled as if they understood the sheer delight of this object. It is in the form of a sword, although our understanding is it is actually a standard that would be held above a cortege or a procession in times of battle or liturgy, and it is ancient and adorned with what we believe is Persian script. It's very ancient, as I say, and worn, and I think whoever wins it will understand that it has a presence of its own, as if it knows you are holding it. And I'm certain that if you coax it in the right way, you'll discover it has all kinds of other stories to tell.
The Ripening of Rustam Khan. Once upon a time, long, long ago, when the birds flew in zigzag lines and the moon was always full, a little boy was born to a swordsmith and his wife. They named him Rustam Khan. From the winter morning of his birth, the little boy yearned to make a difference, even before he knew there was a world beyond his crib. As his first weeks slipped into months and then beyond a year, Rustam Khan's yearning grew and grew. While the other infants in the village were crawling about on their stomachs, the swordsmith's son was already imagining the things he would do as soon as he could get up on his feet and walk. Winter snows melted, giving way to spring, then the blistering summer heat was replaced by the cold once again, and still Rustam Khan yearned. Each day he would sit in a little chair beside the forge and watch his father hammering steel blades destined for the kingdom's warriors. While other boys were thinking about stalking toads in the reeds, Rustam Khan spent every waking moment wondering what his lot was to be and how he could be the very best version of himself. Beneath the sprawling mulberry tree in the middle of the village, he learned to read, write, and count with the other children. Then, each day after lessons, he would help his father in the workshop, preparing the steel to be beaten into blades. 7 winters came and went. Then another 7. "The day will come when you are a great swordsmith," the boy's father said proudly one afternoon. "Always remember that a fine sword is capable of being used for war or peace." That night, Rustam Khan went to bed, his father's words turning in his head. Rather than the usual dreams of gallant princes and endless battles, he found himself in a land where war was almost unknown. Whenever 2 people had a quarrel, they would take up swords and settle their differences. But, unlike in the waking world, the swords on the dreamscape were ceremonial. Their blunt blades were inscribed messages of fraternity and peace. As the swords were swung, they radiated good energy. All at once, the differences were forgotten, and the quarrelling parties hugged as friends. The morning after the curious dream, Rustam Khan attended his lessons under the mulberry tree, but his mind wasn't on what the teacher was saying. Instead, he was thinking about the magical swords he had seen in the dream world. That afternoon, he went to his father's workshop as he always did, with the ceremonial swords still on his mind. "What is troubling you, my son?" asked the swordsmith. Rustam Khan described the dream. "It was a world that was inside out," he said in little more than a whisper. The boy's father, who was holding a magnificent blade he had shaped over weeks, held the steel up to the light. "Since I was your age, I have made swords in the workshop," he said, "just as my father did and his father before him." At that moment, the sound of horses' hooves could be heard charging down the valley. Rustam Khan and his father turned to see a cloud of swirling dust. Within a minute or two, a knight of the realm was standing at entrance to the workshop. Dressed in black, with an exquisite helmet replete with twin peacock plumes crowning his head, he held up a fabulous sword with a watered steel blade. At once, the master swordsmith recognized it as a blade he himself had fashioned for the king. "Did you not make this wretched weapon?" the knight demanded. "I did indeed," the swordsmith answered. "Well, it has failed his majesty. He's ordered that you are to be imprisoned in the deepest, darkest dungeon." Confused, the swordsmith held up a hand. "That blade is the very finest to ever have been struck. Surely it did not fail in battle." The Black Knight shook his head. "It was not used in battle," he answered. "Then, if I might inquire, how could it have failed his majesty?" "Because," the knight replied, "when his majesty pulled back the scabbard and glimpsed at his reflection, it displeased him. May I remind his majesty that it is a sword for battle, not a mirror for the boudoir." Within the blink of an eye, the swordsmith had been trussed up in chains and hauled away. Rustam Khan begged for his father to be released, but the pleading went unheard. As the swordsmith was dragged off, he cried out for his son to come close. "Quick, snatch the amulet from my neck," he yelled. "Hold it in your fist and let it lead you to the one person alive who can help me." Following the instructions, Rustam Khan tore away the silver amulet and watched as the royal guard hurried back to the palace with his father as their prisoner. 5 minutes after the guard had gone, the dust settled. He wondered whether he had imagined the entire episode. But, as he stood there in shock, the little silver amulet began to warm in his fist. Fearful at what fate his father would receive, Rustam Khan rushed home to his mother and explained what had happened. "Your father has worn that amulet since he was a child," she said, her expression grave. "There is but one course of action. You must take to the open road and let it guide you." "But mother, how can an amulet like this guide anyone? After all, there are no directions or map." "Trust in it, my dear son. When it is warm to the touch, you will know you are on the right path." "And how will I know when I have reached the destination, mother?" asked Rustam Khan, tears welling in his eyes. "You will know because you know," she replied. "Now take these provisions and leave at once." And so, picking up a little knapsack filled with dried meat and fruit, the swordsmith's son set off to find an answer, the amulet in his fist. From the first stride he made, it heated up, its warmth ebbing and flowing as though it were alive. For days and then weeks, the young man kept going day and night. The amulet's warmth guided him through forests and across mountains, over quicksand, and zigzagging through one kingdom after the next. And as he ventured ahead, Rustam Khan was forced to survive by his wits, ripened by the journey. From time to time, the amulet cooled, signaling to Rustam Khan that he had deviated from the route he was supposed to take. He wondered whether he would ever reach an ultimate destination, but something coaxed him to keep going, despite all the odds. A year and a day after setting out from the threshold of his home, Rustam Khan clambered up the mountainside. As ever, in his fist the amulet was pulsing with warmth. All of a sudden, it grew hotter than it had ever been. Panting from the climb, the wayfarer stopped in his tracks. He opened his fist and saw the amulet was no longer silver, but was glowing with an eerie, iridescent light. Rather than radiating outwards in all directions, the light seemed to be pointing towards a cave. Summoning his courage, Rustam Khan made his way up to the cavern's mouth and shuffled inside. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he heard a voice, a woman's voice. "I have waited for you," it said. "Who are you?" the young man called out. "I am the amulet that you hold in your hand." Rustam Khan looked down and saw that the voice was indeed emanating from the amulet. "But I have come on a long journey to find someone who can save my father. If you are the amulet that has guided me all these weeks and months, why haven't you spoken to me before?" "Because, as I said, my dear Rustam Khan, I have been waiting. Waiting for me to reach this cave up here on the mountainside in a distant kingdom?" "No," whispered the voice gently. "I have been waiting for you yourself to be ready to save your father." Rustam Khan sensed his bloodstream coursing with adrenaline. He had travelled for a year and a day, while his father was surely being tortured in the palace dungeons. Reading his thoughts, the amulet spoke. As your father used to tell you, a sword is only perfect when it has strength and flexibility. In the same way, to be effective, a young man must have the right qualities that can only come through experience. Without experience, no amount of youthful enthusiasm can succeed. Incensed at having been lured to the end of the earth, Rustam Khan held the amulet up and glared at it. "So what am I to do?" he yelled. "Because in case you've forgotten, my father is languishing in a dungeon, that is, if he's still alive." The amulet cooled, the stream of iridescent light fading. Rustam Khan felt more alone than ever before. Standing there in absolute darkness, he thought back to all the adventures he had experienced in setting off from the valley of his birth. As he remembered the escapades, they were projected over the cave walls. "You are ready," said the voice. "Listen with care." And as Rustam Khan listened, the amulet explained what to do. When he had committed the instructions to memory, he began to ask the amulet the route he should take back to the kingdom from which he had come. Before the question had left his mouth, he realized he was no longer in the cave on the mountainside. Instead, Rustam Khan was now standing at the base of a great citadel. Peering up, he perceived at once that it was the palace in which the cruel king resided, and where his father was imprisoned. He was about to do as the amulet had bid him to do, when he heard a troop of the royal guard marching fast towards the gates. To his surprise, he saw that they were the very same soldiers that had taken his father. Sure enough, as he watched, Rustam Khan spied his father being dragged inside the palace. Through some feat of magic, the amulet had taken him back in space and time. Waiting for the citadel's great doors to close, the young man hurried around to the rear of the palace as he had been told to do. As the amulet had said, he found a low doorway covered in foliage. In times of danger, it had been constructed as a direct route of escape for the royal family and was long since forgotten. 10 minutes after slipping through the concealed portal, Rustam Khan found himself in the king's private apartment. The walls were hung with the finest silks, the air scented with perfumes from the east. The secret passage had circumvented the droves of armed guards who protected the royal family both night and day. Hearing the sound of footsteps, Rustam Khan hid behind a curtain. Furled up in an embroidered silk robe, the king strode into the salon and hovered at a bowl of fruits before popping a plump-looking fig into his mouth. He was about to take another when there was a knock at the door. Turning, he found this chief of staff, the Black Knight, standing to attention. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing, "may it please you to hear that the wretched swordsmith has been arrested and is in the dungeons, as you desired." "In the deepest, darkest dungeon?" the monarch snarled. "Yes, indeed, sire, the very deepest and the very darkest of the dungeons." "And what of the damned sword?" The Black Knight held it up. "Here it is, your Majesty. 10 years in the dungeons will teach that lowly creature to make sure the royal reflection is always handsome." Placing the magnificent sword on the low divan, the Black Knight strode out, leaving the king alone. In a single deft moment, Rustam Khan stepped out from behind the curtain, snatched the sword, and held it to the monarch's throat. "Make a sound and I'll end your days," he said. "The blade may not please you as a mirror, but I assure you it is sharp enough to shave with." An hour after his son had slipped in through the secret doorway, the swordsmith had been rescued from the dungeons. In his place was the king, whimpering and forlorn. An hour after that, Rustam Khan took the amulet from his pocket. He was about to tie it around his father's neck when he whispered a line of thanks. To his surprise, the voice came again, and as it had done in the cave. "Why don't you thank me to my face?" it said. As Rustam Khan stepped back, confused, a plume of smoke billowed out from the amulet. In less time than it takes to tell, it materialized into the most attractive young woman the swordsmith's son had ever seen. "My name is Princess Layla," she said. "My father was deposed by the grandfather of the brutal monarch whom you have imprisoned." "You mean?" Layla nodded. "My father was the king, and this was our palace." Bowing, Rustam Khan pledged his loyalty. In the days that followed, Princess Layla assumed the throne and was immediately as adored by her subjects as her own father had once been. Given a royal warrant, the swordsmith found himself working from the finest workshops within the palace. As for Rustam Khan, he used the experience he had gained from his adventure to make a fortune for himself and for others. And having travelled with him on his great adventure and known firsthand that he was the finest man alive, the princess waited for the day when he was ready. One spring morning, while they were out walking together in the valley where he had been born, Rustam Khan got down on one knee and asked the Princess Layla to be his bride. Her face glowing with unbridled delight, she accepted at once. And that is how a young man, who had been born as a swordsmith's son in a time of woe, went on to be ripened and to know true love.